Good morning. Welcome to our Bible study this morning. This morning we're beginning the first of a two-part lesson on Hebrews 12, verse number 1. The subject of this lesson is the besetting sins of life. And if you don't understand exactly what I mean by a besetting sin, that's what we'll be looking at this morning. We're going to be defining what a besetting sin is. Then in our next lesson, in part number 2, we'll be looking at 9 biblical principles on how to overcome besetting sin in our life. Okay, that'll be the second part. For this first part, let's look at Hebrews chapter 12 and verse number 1. Here we read about a besetting sin. Listen to what's said. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Here we find in Hebrews 12:1 the phrase, the sin which doth so easily beset us. In the context of this, we're being told that we are to turn from those things, to lay aside those sins that beset us. Before we can understand how to lay aside the besetting sins in our life, we need to understand what a besetting sin is. What are sins that beset us? Well, if we study the phrase, too easily beset us, okay, we're going to study that phrase this morning. Let's look at the idea of sin, first of all, the sin which doth so easily beset us. What's meant by sin? I think probably most of us, if not all of us, at one time or another has heard the word sin used. Most of us, again, if not all of us, have a general idea, general understanding of what sin is. Let me share with you some particulars about this word that's being used here in Hebrews 12:1 for sin. The word for sin in Hebrews 12:1 comes from a Greek word that means to miss the mark. To miss the mark. You know, it might be used to describe, let's say, an archer that draws back his arrow and his bow and shoots it at a target, and he misses the target. He missed the mark he was shooting at. He did not accomplish the goal that was set before him to accomplish. That's the idea of a sin. It's when we miss the mark. What's it talking about in practical terms? What is the mark that we're all to be working towards? Glorifying the Lord in our life, honoring the Lord in our life by showing Him forth to others. That's really one of the great goals of all mankind, one of the great responsibilities all men have upon themselves. It's to glorify and honor God. And one of the greatest ways we do that is by showing God in our life, by revealing God in our life. When people look at us, they should be able to learn a lot about God if we're doing what's right in our life, if we're fulfilling that goal that's been set before us. Let me give you an example. We know that Jesus Christ, God Himself, lived a perfectly, I'll use the term genuine life on earth. And here's what I mean by that. The words He spoke were truth 100% of the time. You could count on them to come to pass every time. Every word He spoke, every teaching He gave, you can count on, is 100% truth with no error in it. He never acted out of deceitful motives. Every time that Christ did something, He did it with pure motives. Whatever that action was, whatever that work was, He never once planned behind people's backs and kept them, in the dark about what He was really doing. He never was hypocritical. The life He lived was a genuine life that was free of all deceitful motives. He never misled anybody in any way. That's what I mean by Christ living a genuine life on earth. Okay. If we want to reveal Christ to others, again, keep in mind, Christ was God Himself. If we want to reveal Christ, God, to others in our life, What's one of the ways we have to do that? By living a perfectly genuine life, right? That would be one way we could do it. He lived a genuine life, so by us living a genuine life in front of others, that would reveal Christ to them, because they could look at our life and say, for example, Rob Barkman, he doesn't deceive anybody. I can learn about Christ because Christ didn't deceive anybody. Rob Barkman didn't plan behind people's backs. So therefore, I can learn about Christ from that. Christ didn't plan behind people's backs. Because Rob Barkman is following the example of Christ, I can see Christ in him. That's the goal of all mankind, and yet sadly, all mankind, including myself, fall far short of that. The target we're aiming at with our life is to set an example that perfectly replicates Christ's life on earth, to reveal Christ to others. Okay, so that's the goal I'm shooting at. Just like I remember the archer with the target, where he's shooting arrows at the target, trying to hit this target with his life, but he fails. Okay, that's my target now, to live a perfectly genuine life. But what happens? During the course of my life, I lie. During the course of my life, I'm disingenuous. During the course of my life, I'm playing behind people's backs and don't tell them the true motive behind why I do things. During the course of my life, at times, I'm hypocritical. Any time that in my life I do not reflect Christ in my life, I'm sinning because I missed the target. The target I was shooting for, I'm not hitting. The target that God gave me for my life, I'm not hitting. I'm missing it. The times I miss that, the times I fail God, the times I fail revealing Christ in my life to others, are the times that I sin. That's why the word sin, again, means to miss the mark. You can do that with any aspect of Christ's life. Anything that Christ did on earth, or said on earth, or thought on earth, any desires he showed on earth, we should be replicating in our life. We should be following his example perfectly. When we fail in that, we are committing sin. That's why the example I was using about the deceitful life, that's why the Bible says lying is sin. Why is lying sin? Because Christ never lied. When a person lies, they're not following the example of Christ, therefore they are sinning. When a person lies, they're not revealing Christ to the world, therefore they're sinning. It's that type of idea. You can do that with any aspect of Christ's life. We are to follow Christ's example perfectly, and in doing that, we would not sin. The problem is none of us do it perfectly. None of us even come close to following Christ's example perfectly. All of us have sin in our life. All of us have repeated sin in our life. That's the idea of sin. Okay, now let's look at the other word I want us to concentrate on. The Greek word is translated in this verse, easily beset. Remember, it's the sin which doth so easily beset us. So let's look at the two words, easily beset, because they come from one Greek word. The Greek word there means to be well surrounded, or to be totally encased, or to be completely entangled. If you can picture in your mind, let's say you find a bug out in the yard, you put it in a box and you put the lid on top of the box. At that point in time, that bug is totally surrounded by that box. Bottom, top, left, right, front, back, the bug is totally encased. The same thing if you ever watch a fly get caught in a spider's web, where it keeps struggling to get out and it only makes itself worse to the point it's entirely covered by web. It's totally encased in the web. It's totally entangled in the web. Okay, that's the meaning of this phrase, to easily beset. The idea of easily comes from the same word. It has the idea there to be totally encased, to be, totally surrounded by something, and it was an easy thing to become that way. You didn't have to do much to become that way. It's an easy thing. It's almost a natural thing. When a fly flies into a spider's web, it's only natural. He's going to get entangled. He doesn't have to work much at it. Once he hits that web, it's pretty much a done deal. He's going to be entangled. That type of idea. That means to be easily beset. That's the idea behind it. Let me give you an example. And I'll use the example of an army. Okay, you have an invading army that's moving into a country and they want to surround the capital city. Okay. They decide they're going to sneak up on the capital city at night so nobody can see them. Okay. Because they sneak up on this city and nobody's expecting them and nobody can see them in the dark, it's a very easy thing for them to encase that city. It's an easy thing for them to surround that city. So they're, it's just, they just basically walk in, surround the city. Not much opposition at all because the people of the city don't even see them coming. Because of that, they efficiently, they entirely surround the city. The people of the city get up the next morning to look out over the walls of the city, and all they see is the invading army. They look to the east, there's the invading army. They look to the west, more of the invading army. They look to the north, they look to the south. Every place they look in, every direction, all they can see is the invading army. There's no escape. The invading army has them entirely surrounded where there's no path they can take to get past them. That's the basic idea behind this Greek word for easily beset. Folks, it's just like some sins that are in our life. Do you ever have a sin in your life that you think you've dealt with, and yet it sneaks back in and you don't even hardly realize it, and there it is again? You sincerely try to take the sin to the Lord. You sincerely ask Him to forgive, and again, from your standpoint, you feel like it's over and done with. It's a done issue. And yet just shortly, you find it's entered your life again. It's like there's no way you can turn to get away from it. Almost everything you've tried to rid your life of a certain sin, it just keeps coming back, and it keeps coming back, and it keeps coming back. You try going to different counselors to help. They don't seem to be able to help. You do A, B, C, D. You try everything you know of to do, and you realize, from a human standpoint, you cannot escape this sin. It keeps entering into your life. It's a habitual thing. That even though you see it, and you know it's wrong, and you don't want to do it, you see it come back, and come back. That's what a besetting sin is in our life. It's the idea of an habitual sin. It's a sin that we see. We recognize it's wrong, and we do truly, sincerely want to get rid of it. But it keeps coming back no matter what we try to do. That's what the writer of Hebrews means, and I believe it was probably Paul who wrote Hebrews. That's what the writer of Hebrews means when he says, the sin which does so easily beset us. The sin which so easily continues to surround us. The sin that so easily enters our life, even when we try everything we know to do to deal with that sin and to rid our life of that sin. That's a sin that so easily besets us. Folks, what do we do as Christians? What do we do when we face this type of habitual sin in our life that we sincerely desire to have out of our life, but it seems like it is just very difficult? Next to impossible. Well, it is impossible from a human standpoint to rid it from our lives. The Bible gives us several different principles that helps us to understand what we can do to rid these type of sins out of our life. In our next lesson, That'll be part 2 of this series, the final part of this series. We'll be looking at 9 different principles the Bible gives us on how to deal with these besetting sins in our life. The habitual sins in our life that we've struggled with, that we've tried to rid our lives of, but it seems like they're never able to really get them out of our lives. Lord willing, in our next lesson, we'll cover now the 9 principles of how we can deal with the besetting sins in our life. In other words, the habitual sins that we struggle with on a daily basis that we are never able to seem to totally rid out of our life. Thank you for joining me in part 1 of this study. I trust you'll join me for part 2, the 9 principles that we can apply to deal with besetting sins in our lives. May the Lord bless you as you study His Word.